Hello! It is 7:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, January 24th, and it is the 19th episode of Effluvium. And for this installation, I have a good friend of mine. We've been friends for many years. That's not the only reason why I'm having him join us. He is a perfumer, a painter, a musician, and an all-around artist, and a talented one at that. His name is John Biebel. He is the perfumer for January Scent Project, and he is going to be joining us for the discussion this evening. And among other things, we're going to be discussing composition, how accords are built in a perfume composition, and he'll be providing us with some valuable input on that. We'll also be talking about what is in a review. What is a review? Process. What does it contribute? How does it play a role? And we'll also explore different creative assets that can be partnered with perfume, whether it be music, film, literature, visual art, what have you. And of course, we're going to be doing some banter on some of our favorite fragrances that we've been wearing and tooling around with lately. I have a few of them over here, and we'll be discussing those. Ryan, unfortunately, is unable to join us. He is without electricity. So we do have Adam Forziati, my good friend and regular panelist, who will also be joining me this evening. So for this week, I will be doing something a little bit different. I will be doing second impressions. So usually I do first impressions, but for this week, I am going to be revisiting 3 fragrances that originally I wasn't sure if I felt connected with. I wasn't really sure if they resonated with me. So I thought it best to just set them aside and revisit them later, and I am going to be doing that tonight. I'm going to be doing the second impressions of 3 fragrances. So we'll get this started. The first one that I will do is Anatole Le Breton Glamour. Now, I already have 2 from this perfumer, and I am really intrigued by his approach to perfume. He, much like many other perfumers, I do think he started off as a perfume writer / blogger and had branched out and studied perfume making. So let's get started with this one. This one is Glamour from Anatole Le Breton. So this is my second impression. First impression had me wondering if it made sense to include this in my vast collection, because there were certain aspects of it that reminded me of a few others that I already know and love and own. And those who know me well know that I do appreciate a good bit of cumin and caraway and coriander and spicy BO-ish kinds of perfume, or rather spices in perfume. And what I recall thinking about this one is that it had reminded me so much of some others that I already appreciate, like Quartier Declaration, L'Autre from Diptyque, Eau d'Hermès, that this would be somewhat redundant. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just not giving it giving it a chance. I really like the opening. I like that it has this herbal citrus opening, but it quickly enters that. It quickly enters that textured, humanic kind of perspiration over citruses and greens, which can remind somebody of Declaration or Eau d'Hermès. But I have a little bit more of an open mind here. Note that I have to go very close to my skin. Not that that's important, but this seems like a somewhat subtle one. So that is Anatole Breton Glimor. We'll revisit that in about an hour, and then at the end of the stream. The second one I am revisiting is Mabette from Eris Parfums. And the reason why I am revisiting this one is because I have been paying closer attention to Barbara Herrmann, because I read her book, Sentence Subversion, Sentence Subversion. And I thought it would be a good idea to get back to this one. I think at first I was like, well, I've smelled a lot of these concepts before, but I'm going to try it again. This, animalic, very animalic, actually. My office chair makes a lot of noise. Oh, I'm liking the top notes in this. I don't really recall paying close attention to them the first time around. And it isn't, a stink beast to start off with, but it does have... it has a bit of a bite. It does remind me of the civet heavy Chypres from the 80s at this point in the development at the top. I'm appreciating it more this time around. All right, and the third one is Les Indémodables, Rose de Jamal. I already have 3 from this house, and I feel like that's a lot for a house that's on the pricier side, but they have some great fragrances. I already have Mousse de Sable, Oriental Velour, and Ambre Supreme. Rose de Jamal, because I am a rose fiend. But the first time I wore this, I think I was a little puzzled. And I thought maybe I should just put this aside and get back to it some other time. So put this over here on this right wrist. A little dab will do you. All right. I almost kind of get this feeling of rose with fennel. And maybe dill. I don't think those are notes in the fragrance, though. I'm kind of digging it, though. See, the rose isn't a jammy rose. It isn't a wine rose. It isn't a dark rose. There is a sheerness to it. There is a, it's more translucent, and it's allowing other things to have their time in the spotlight, I guess. And it is unisex. That's one thing I do recall, is that this was much more of a unisex kind of scent. It's funny, at this point in its development, very early on in the top notes, it reminds me of a cheapie called Nirvana Rose, Elizabeth and James. And when I say cheapie, I mean cheapie, as in like you could go into Kohl's and you could buy it for $18, but it's fantastic. $18, Nirvana Rose, $250, Les Indémodables. Well, it's going to have to do a little bit more. Let's see what happens a little bit later. We'll revisit in an hour. I like it, but I don't know. So far, I don't know how much more I can get out of this that I can already get out of Nirvana Rose, truth be told. So those are the 3 second impressions. And I think that was the reason why the first impression, I was like, oh no, this already reminds me of Nirvana Rose, and why would I get a luxury version of that? So I'm going to visit the chat here. We're going to take a look and see what's been going on. Just forgive me. I need to do a little catching up here. So am I, Rachel. Good to see you. Rachel, if you would like to be a panelist, just send me a private message. I'll send you the StreamYard link. Ryan was unable to join us this evening. So what I'll do is I'll check to see if you send me a message, and I'll send you a link. Okay. Hello, Mr. Clean. Good evening. Hi, Will. Your scent of the day, Francesca Bianchi, Under My Skin. That's intentional. Hi, Margie. Thank you very much. That is actually Richard Harvey. That's from a KPM soundtrack. So KPM is a record label that made library music for television and films, and that was a cut from one of the Richard Harvey albums. The name escapes me, unfortunately. Actually, no, the name doesn't escape me because it's right in this, right over here. It's called Festival A. Usually, sometimes they would have, amusing names, but sometimes they would just be very straightforward. So that was Festival, and that was part A. There was Festival B and C from that particular album. Good evening. Good to see you. Great choice, JHL. Jubilation 25. Giacomo Vintage. Just did a review on that one last week during a Clove Week. Very nice. Ambre Sultan. Nice. Good stuff. One of my favorite ambers. One of the first Serge Lutens fragrances that I smelled. And another one wearing vintage Giacomo de Giacomo, GMG. What a coincidence. Love stinky spices and herbs and roots. So do I. Hello, Duncan. Good to see you. Okay. And your scent is Bois, or Bois. I always want to say Bois. Bois 1920 à l'extrême. Hello. Behave, class, or you'll get the ruler. Or I will take two chalkboard erasers and go like this, right in your face. Fennel and dill. No, I kind of like the idyllic dill. I like the idea of dill in fragrance, as long as it wouldn't become too much of an association with pickles, like Vlasic pickles, like the stork who brings you your Vlasic pickles. No, I want my dill to work effectively in a blend and not necessarily give me that pickle sensation. Great to see you, Melissa. I'm glad that you could tune in. Hey, Fernando. Good to see you. Oh, I'll take that as a compliment. Hi, Mishi. Great to see you. Scent of the morning, Angelique Papillon. Wonderful. Hope you can stay up. Hopefully this is not affecting your beauty sleep and that you don't have to get up too early for work. Don't want to force people to stay up too late. Great. Yep. Yeah, I do recall that now. I oddly like the smell of wet leaves and some of the early indulges that come off of a decaying leaf. Yeah, I do like that smell of wet leaves, that process of decomposition that takes place as well. And Anthony says, cumin power. I think John uses cumin too. Looking forward to the masterclass and both of your insights into materials and combinations and historical usages and perfumes. We'll see how much we can cover tonight. Hello, Basic. Morlaco. Timbuktu. Very nice choice. Hello. Okay, great. And Immortel. Afternoon of a Fawn. I was wearing that earlier. Shared a review on Instagram. Great. All right, so the time is now 7:17. We did our second impressions. And Adam should be joining us shortly, and we do have John on backstage, patiently waiting. We're going to give it a few more minutes for Adam to get backstage as well. And in the chat, just share with me, if you haven't already, because many of you have, what is your scent of the evening, or what was your scent of the day, if anything? Hey there, Joe, DDLD, good to see you. And Dave, great to see you as well. John's fragrances are damn good and very unique. I couldn't say it better myself. And I like unique. One of my faves is actually Bervuvu. That's what I decided. And I'll talk about a little of that a little bit later. I think maybe it's a good idea not to keep him waiting, because I think some of you have come here to see him, and I don't want him waiting back there anymore. Let's bring him in.
Hey.
Hi.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Sounds great.
How are you, JJ? How's it going?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well.
Charles Frog just mentioned Empire d'Azim, the Oritza Lagan. Have you tried that one?
I have not, actually, although I do like Chypre-Mousse, I want to say.
Love Chypre-Mousse. That's actually one of my all-time favorites, and that's a challenging one for some people, but I love it.
But it's got that incredibly earthy, really like sink your teeth into kind of smell that is, really gorgeous.
Like, to me, it's, we talk about oak moss, even though that's a lichen. Like, I smell actual moss, like true botanical moss, like picking it up off the ground with the dirt, maybe some mushrooms in it. It's a really a true to life outdoors, walking in nature, forest Chypre, which may be a little bit overwhelming to some people, but that just comes naturally to me.
No, it's a great scent.
Yeah.
So everybody out there, by the way, too.
Yes, we have currently 29 people tuned in. Not bad. We're 20 minutes in.
Great.
And we should just start talking about some of the subjects that we decided upon. Yeah. I know that you were interested in exploring a discussion on building accords, building accords, and maybe that process and what goes into it. And I wanted to ask you, what were some of the things that were floating in your head regarding that? Let's get that started.
Yeah, sure. What I thought, but I think part of the reason I brought it up with you is because whenever I start working on something new, it usually involves at some part making a new accord of something that I haven't done before, I haven't worked with before. And what I like about that process is that you're sort of making first an accord which can sometimes almost be a perfume in and of itself, which then goes into another perfume, right? So you're almost making a few compositions and then grouping them together, and that becomes a bigger composition. So I find that some accords are a little bit harder to make because of the subtlety involved. Like, I'm working more with floral accords right now. Like, I'm working on osmanthus, and that's been challenging in the best of ways because, just tiny variations in material can make some really major shifts in what the smell actually ends up being. So I think what I find fascinating about accords is just those tiny variables that you can spend weeks tweaking or playing with in order to create just a subtle difference in the way that something is perceived. That's a big important facet of accords that I like.
Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating, I was actually just chatting a little bit on another stream earlier with Eugene on osmanthus, and how the osmanthus absolute, much like many floral absolutes, is only sort of this cross section of what the flower entails. Like, it's not going to be it's not a whole headspace by any means. And I find that I can pick up how much or how little of the osmanthus absolute is used in maybe an osmanthus accord in a certain fragrance because of my familiarity with that material. It's like a little bit more leathery and almost animalic in its undertones than you would expect an osmanthus material to be. There's one that I really like, Chemo Month, from Diptyque, which I find it's in there a great deal, but it's also balanced out by like some sweeter resins. What is it that you think might be most challenging about putting together, say, for example, an osmanthus accord, when we know that the natural is not going to really represent it 100%?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's something I'm kind of struggling with a little bit right now. And that's that. I think some of the people tuned in might find interesting is that you have this sort of triangulation of ideas. Like there's osmanthus as you would smell in nature. There's osmanthus as you would smell as an absolute or a CO2 extraction or an oil of some kind. And then there is this sort of third aspect, which is what we mostly deal with, which is osmanthus as imagined in a perfume form. Now, an accord that you make is going to vacillate somewhere between those 3 points of the triangle, right? Where it's going to not likely just be a pure absolute. It's not going to just be a copy of something else you smell in a perfume, and it's not going to be exactly what you smell in nature. So that's where the skill or just creativity of a perfumer comes in, where they can take information from all those 3 points and then create something new. But they can let it reside somewhere closer to one of those 3 points on the triangle if they want to. So if they want it to smell more like osmanthus as it does, just in nature, you can do a lot to force that along by adding in kind of a bit of an air space, or a little bit of green leaves, or a little bit of some, like pumice ether or something to give you a sense of the soil, or, if you want it to smell very perfumey, you're going to probably add more floral accords in it to kind of give it more floracity and more kind of that sort of punchiness that you get in a perfume. So I think, but that's what I love about making perfume, right? Is that there's all that opportunity to create stuff that inside that triangle. That's what I find so interesting.
Right. And it's also, it's fascinating how with a lot of accords, we actually end up getting the assistance from other flowers. And maybe those are flowers that we wouldn't immediately associate with the flower that we're building an accord for. Like, say, for example, the one that always comes to mind to me is like carnation. Like carnation, oddly enough, needs like a certain amount of ylang ylang. But if I were to just sort of think to myself, like ylang ylang and carnation, how does that work out? It's interesting how, for those who may not be familiar with building an accord, all these different things come into play. And all of these things that come into play may not even show up as like a note on the pyramid at all. Let's explore that topic a little bit about
Sure.
notes, note pyramids and note breakdowns versus what actually may be in a perfume, and how we choose our notes versus what's actually in there.
Yeah, that's also another great question, and one that I really like to talk about, because when you sort of break it down for people, they usually understand it. They're like, okay, that explains why you could have something like anisegaldehyde, which I use quite often in perfumes, and it is a pretty big component of things like flowers, right? And yet it wouldn't really make sense to list that as a single note in a fragrance, because it ends up getting kind of consumed into an accord. It becomes part of a flower. It becomes part of a balsamic kind of tone of some sort, right? So to sort of pull out certain components and say this one serves to be called a note and this one doesn't, I think that if the role of note listings is to kind of guide and help the wearer to understand a little bit about how the composition is put together, that same thought process should carry through in how the notes are listed. And pulling out certain components that are really meant to form an accord are only going to confuse and just like kind of create a bit of a mishmash for the wearer and say like, well, I don't know what this is and why do I even know about it? Because it's more of a functional part of a perfume and not really actually a detectable note per se.
Right.
Yeah. And as you know, there's certain things in perfumes that are really, they're much more functional than actually like things you smell, really like, oh God, I detect that weird chemical component that I love so much.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are some like that. I mean, some people love the smell of Isui Super, and some people, love the smell of Javanol, or, they, Hedione, or Cashmere, and things like that. They do. So it's a balance.
It kind of reminds me of when I'm able to detect methylphenolate, which I often can detect when there is, to a lesser extent, jasmine, but really often like orange blossom.
Orange blossom, yeah.
And I love it. I love the taste and the scent of like a classic grape, Concord grape.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny how I know that it's not intentional, but it ends up being sort of this association that I get in my head if I even notice a little bit of it. It's like I'm sensitive to it, but I like it.
Yeah.
But it's like I can't help but to think it's like orange blossom with Concord grapes. Like it's just the way that my brain interprets it.
Yeah.
But that's also a perfect example of we wouldn't put like a Concord grape note in the note breakdown, even though there's methylphenolate. So for those who are tuned in, methylphenolate is the chemical compound that not only is found in a lot of floral scents like jasmine and orange blossom, but in higher quantities, it is what gives Concord grapes their scent and their smell. And Concord grapes, if you're not familiar, is the kind of grape that you would find in Concord grape jelly, grape flavored candy, not table grapes, but those, round grapes. That are in season in September and have the seeds, not your table grapes. So, I digress. We have Adam waiting in the back. He is finished having a little meal and is going to join us. I'm going to bring him in here. Hey, Adam.
Hey.
Great to have you back.
I'm like looking at my teeth like, oh, man, I just finished eating. Like I was like, oh, man, I got to get on the street.
Did you floss?
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Hey, sir, how are you?
Good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Oh, it's a breath of fresh air. A breath of fresh digital air, mind you.
Nice. Good to see you.
It's some kind of air, right? So we're just talking about bases and how they're put together and what happens to get a base together. And maybe what we should do also, because we have all different, all different levels tuned in. Some folks may not know the difference between a bass and a chord and a note. Can one of you take the lead in describing? Maybe we'll have the resident perfumer. Let's have you take the lead in describing what is a base. What does that mean when that goes into a perfume?
Yeah, sure. So bases are interesting. It's kind of a bit like a box cake, right? In the sense of, sometimes you can take a box cake. No, I'm joking slightly. A box cake, you can add things to it and make it more interesting and whatnot. A base is actually a slightly more frequently used item than box cakes, probably, but they're sort of pre-mixed accords that generally tend to be proliferated in the industry, or they're easy to get. Sometimes they are proprietary and they're only made for maybe one company for a while. Then it gets released broader to the market. Some of them are so common that I don't know the full patent law behind it, but like it becomes, how you make it becomes pretty well known, and people make their own versions of the base. Like Mustasax is a good example of well-known base that people make their own versions of now, but was kind of a very particular kind of perfume base for a while. And then these bases are often repeated throughout different perfumes. They're sometimes like house bases, like certain companies will have their own bases that they use for certain fragrances. There's some that I use, although I have to say the one concern that one can get with bases is that a company that creates them may suddenly just pull the base and doesn't use it anymore. And then you're left like, I don't have the space that I can use anymore in a fragrance. So, that can be problematic. So sometimes some perfumers don't want to rely on bases because they are dependent on, femination, other companies to create such things and keep them in stock on their shelves. And some of them do get replaced. There was a Civet base that I really liked. I think was it Civet 10 that is not made anymore. And, there's a new sort of replacer for it, which is fine and it's good. But I particularly like that. I stockpiled some of it, which is good, but it's no longer there. So yeah, that's a little very quick bit on bases.
Great, because I guess I wanted to help the viewers get the distinction between a base and then an accord. So now I'm going to have you just basically explain, what is an accord? What does that mean?
Really quickly, an accord, its simplest way to put it is it's essentially a way to recreate, I think is probably the best way to do it, what you find in nature. So when you smell a rose in a perfume, most likely what you're smelling is a rose accord. So it's a recreation of the component parts of a rose put back together again from the parts that are usually analyzed to be found how it exists in nature. So they just sort of will put all those things together again back in a lab, perhaps with some of the original rose, whether it be from a CO2 extraction or essential oil or what have you. And then through that process, begin to mimic what perhaps an actual rose smells like, or a fantasy rose, or a rose at a certain time of day or something like that. But that's what that process is.
And this is where it gets a little tricky. Some perfumers may choose to build their own accords or even their own bases. So they could do like a rose accord as a note in a fragrance, use a certain base that they created on their own, or instead of doing that, they could just use a rose base that's already been made, like Rose Jivko, and just sort of add that in. There's my rose. Which I know that like when I was dabbling, that's where I would get impatient, and I would have, I would put the base in and see like, how will this rose base work in here, rather than trying to put together something of my own. Another thing to mention to the audience is that you can't really add, I suppose you could do this as a perfumer with creative license, but if we were to just put Rose Absolute, sort of like a Bulgarian Rose Absolute, that may not necessarily translate as rose as we know it in a perfume. Isn't that right?
Yeah, in fact, Adam could probably add a lot to that.
Adam, it's your turn.
Yeah, oh my God, it's so right. So the problem with just like dumping a bunch of a random natural material that you like into a blend that you're working on is that it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. I think anybody who's ever dabbled in this will tell you right away that, you can dump a bunch of Rose Absolute into a blend, and then you start adding your woody tones, your musks, your other middle notes to add character, maybe a spice or something like that, or an herb, and then you add something on top like a bergamot or a top note, and you don't end up with something that smells. If you're new to it, if you don't know what you're doing, you do not end up with something that smells remotely like a combination of those things. Typically, what you get is sort of the olfactory equivalent of like when you're combining finger paints together as a child and like mixing all the colors together until some vague notion of brown happens. That's typically what happens if you just sort of assume that you can just put more of something that you like into the blend and more and more and more until it shows up. It doesn't typically behave like that. Aroma molecules are very strange, and each one of them is like a little different, and they behave differently. And, I think we're used to thinking about, perfume compositions in terms of top notes, middle notes, and base notes, things that last a short amount of time, tend to be, energetic, and they kind of buzz off the skin, versus things that stick around for a couple hours or a few hours, versus things that are with you for most of the day, if not into the next day. And that's a fairly fine way to think about materials, because they all behave in different lengths and have different properties, and you need to be able to sort between those two things. But generally speaking, it's a little bit more complicated than even that would suggest. Every rose material that can go into a rose accord might actually behave very differently from the other. So there are things like, I don't know, John, maybe you can throw a couple out, but like rose oxide, to me, that's like a middle to base note. I mean, it can last quite a while, but it's not going to last anywhere near as long as, say, a musk. Rose. There are some musks that have like floral and fruity undertones that perfumers typically use to kind of boost floral notes, especially rose. And bretellide comes to mind, but that's
like
certainly
romandolide too, I think, is another one.
Yeah, exactly. Those kinds of musks. And, that's going to last probably the longest out of any of the materials in a rose accord. You also have to consider, middle and top modifiers, things that make it more of a jammy rose, things that make it more of a dewy, petally kind of old-fashioned soapy rose. All these things, when you add them into a blend, they kind of John, you used a word once when we were talking about blends, but in other words, they proc at different times, right? They kind of do their thing, and then they kind of go away. Or if they're a very long-lasting base note, they do their thing, and then they just kind of grow quieter. And this is all something that you have to kind of take into account when you're constructing an accord. You can't just throw more of something you like into a blend and expect it to be better. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, those are all great points, and I like what you just said, both of you, about certain musks that can lean toward the kind of either fruit type notes or wine or rose type notes, and that's a perfect way that you can take maybe a drop of an actual natural rose component and then a bit of a rose synthetic component, such as I think it's something like Rosalva, which is this very weird, soapy, waxy, almost fatty rose, like a tiny little bit of that, and then something like a musk like ethylene brassylate, and then like a little bit of I don't know, like one of your typical white musks, and that right there is like kind of a long-lasting rose into creamy ending kind of a composition. Hey, we just made a perfume right there. Bam.
That's actually a great idea for a future live.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, what do you want to sniff? All right, let's go.
Right. I remember Rosalva being quite like a personality. Oh my God, that is a little tiny bit goes a long way with that. That will drown everything out. That will just be, that's just like you said, like waxy, soapy, like strong aldehydic rose. Yeah.
So yeah,
but now I can detect it whenever certain rose fragrances. It's like, oh, I know that's in there to create that effect, and I imagine it's like 0.001% of the blend, and it's like I almost said visible. I love when that happens, the synesthesia thing, when it's detectable. Yeah,
absolutely.
Duncan just asked, like Guerlainade, and I think in reference to bases, yes, the Guerlainade proprietary base that is the signature on a lot of classic Guerlain fragrances, which I think includes vanilla and heliotropin and patchouli and a little civet and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That is a perfect example of a base, and that's specific to Guerlain. That's not I don't think that they share that with anyone else. But people have tried to reproduce that for sure. Right. And Panda Fragrance here, I first learned of January Scent Project years ago when I learned of a perfumer based near Boston and tried nearly all of his scents. So good.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Very cool.
And Basic Morlaco, would it be fair to say then that the deconstruction of a note is where the perfumer's ability shines? You want to answer that one?
Wow, that's a really interesting observation. And that opens a lot. That's a great observation. It actually kind of poses a question to me, and I wonder, it probably is, because I think sort of in order to understand a note and whether that expresses itself also through an accord or something, that does require a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of especially to pull apart something to figure out how it was made. That really, you have to be pretty thoughtful about that and analyze a lot, smell very deeply, try to almost replicate what you're smelling, and that can take many forms, can take a long time, a lot of analysis. I think, and also a lot of verbalization. I tend to want to try to put words to these things as well, that helps me to understand what I'm actually looking at, and I'm looking at smelling. And I don't think you always, get those things right off or get like nail them right away. They take some time to do, but yeah, I think it does require skill to do it. I did see your comment, Rachel. Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, unfortunately, Rachel could not make it this evening either, but she is one of our regular panelists, and she's a delight. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that she's enjoying your work. But yeah, building an accord, I recall that being quite challenging depending upon what the subject matter was, and sometimes it involved certain flowers that like I remember trying to put together, like, say, for example, muguet, and thinking, like, oh, sure, I can just put in hydroxycitronel and this and that, and it's going to smell like lily of the valley, no problem, just like that. No, and I'm not going to use any pre-made base. It's not that easy. It isn't as easy as it seems, and so much trial and error is involved.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the usage of materials, Adam, you were mentioning how each natural material is almost like a perfume in itself. It is a discrete material with all these different components in it to make it sort of like a mini perfume. And I think what I remember when I was first sort of dabbling with perfume making, that I wasn't treating them as such, and it does turn into kind of like a muddle. I call it like muddliness. Like,
and that's doing disservice to cocktails, so you really shouldn't use this.
not that kind of muddle. That's a pleasant muddle. This is the kind of muddle where it's just, in the end, I'd go, oh God, I just wasted a whole bunch of stuff, didn't I? Oops.
And that's the tricky bit with naturals. They are very pricey,
yeah.
and precious, really. I mean, depending on which material you're using, that came from a plant, and it came from a mass growing scale like operation, and that requires lots of resources. So it's like whenever you're dropping, a rose absolute. We keep on coming back to rose tonight, I guess, but it could be literally any natural material, no matter how expensive it is. The expense aside, I mean, there's a perfume brand called Precious Liquid, and I don't really know anything about the brand or its work, but I love the name because it's so true. Like everything, and this is true of many synthetics too. It takes a lot of scientific wonder to create any perfume material, regardless of its origin. But especially with naturals, I mean, we all love them. We all love to explore them, and we all love their complexity inherent. But they require so many resources to create. Even the less expensive ones do, and so much water and so much time and effort. And I just think that there's something to be said about the fact that they are very precious. So whenever you're experimenting with them, there's almost like an inherent anxiety that's going on.
Yeah,
I can't use this.
Right. I was so foolish early on, and I would put so much in, not knowing that, first of all, that isn't really customary unless you're doing natural perfume, which I gave up on that months into experimenting. And also, they are precious liquids, precious materials. It's almost like you have to honor them because they're also quite volatile with their own personalities. What would you say, like, I'm thinking of certain, attempting to create certain accords. What would you say are like probably the most difficult ones to tackle? We have woods and flowers and seeds and nuts and spices and all that. What are the most challenging ones?
Well, I can tell you one thing that was a big challenge for me was, and I'll tell you why it was difficult, were fruits. And the reason is that I learned in the process of the last sort of mainline fragrance I made had a lot of fruit accords in them, and vegetables and fruits in them. And some of these fruit smells many of them don't have a natural component to it. They don't create an essential oil. So they have to be recreated synthetically. And you can include certain natural things that sort of help push it in a certain direction, but it's not the same as flowers. Fruits tend to have very specific smells that our brain, like when it comes to food, our brains tend to recognize specific foods more so, I think, than we do flowers. And I think it's because maybe we're wired to discern what things we can eat. It's more of like a survival mechanism. So I found that there is, though, sometimes a little bit of subtlety between what is the difference of a blueberry or a blackberry, and just like the tiniest, and I'm talking like a fraction of a percentage of a material difference between one thing and another. And suddenly you've shifted from making like a wild raspberry into a strawberry, into a banana, into a green banana, into a plantain, into a, and you've just ruined a bunch of work because, you've made this like, hair trigger error in your creation, and you've got to kind of start again. And before you know it, you make interesting things, but they're not specific things. You're going to make this very randomized, like, kind of blue mango or something, right?
Right.
Wild, I guess, but maybe not what you set out to do originally.
And I also imagine, you have this concept in mind, and you think, it would be a cool idea to blend blueberry into ylang ylang, and then you want to have those two notes, but then once you add the two together, then something else happens, and it's neither of them, and it's something that you didn't intend at all. Like, there can be a lot of instances like that, like just by adding something to what to a certain fruit accord or berry accord is going to completely change the direction. Even if you had this idea in mind that you wanted to pair it with something else, and in theory it seemed like a good idea, but then in reality it turned into something that you're like, oh God, this is not what I intended at all. I'm sure that must have happened a lot of times with both of you, and I know that's happened with me, where it's like, no, that's not what I wanted. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, I know I can definitely say that, and I would say for the times that happens, there's also really happy accidents that occur too, where
True, yeah,
there's some kind of bond, like that crazy time where I mixed two natural ingredients, and they created gingerbread. Just two component ingredients created gingerbread in my studio, which was wild, unexpected. And but other times you do get a third that wasn't planned, and it's not where you wanted to go. So that's frustrating, no question about it. And also there's another aspect here that's hard to explain. Like, it's you never know exactly what's going to happen inside that beaker when you're adding drops of things, because two things may sort of force themselves together, or it's sort of like putting a bunch of Legos together. You don't know exactly what things are going to bond in some chemical way that create an unexpected third or fourth note that is completely, not unpleasant, or predominates what you've built, or it is like a synergy, like it's something that is above and beyond what everything else was, which can be a sort of a good or a bad synergy as well too. There, a lot of that has been worked out by people who have done perfuming for decades. Sometimes when you're newer to it, some of this stuff is still kind of unexpected, and I think even for people who perfume for a long time, there's still some surprises. What about you, Adam? What have you experienced in all that?
Certainly. And for context, I don't know how, probably not many people are aware of this, the fact that I do like work on my own blends. I'm in the process of working on my own line, but it's still a ways off. Like, John is very much more advanced in this realm, so take what I say with more of a grain of salt than what John says. And the proof is in the pudding, right? But that being said, I've been doing it for a few years, and I think maybe the most, I wouldn't say that there was like, that I struggle more with the accord as much as like where the accord fits into the perfume, mind you, I also have a very strange way of going about it, where I don't tend to finish a lot of projects, because I feel like I still have a lot to learn. I feel like I still know what my weaknesses are, know what my process is, and know what can go wrong in that process. So I feel like I'm still just kind of working my way at it and not trying to rush it. And so I have a bit of a strange process where I'll just create, many, many variations on a theme, and not really focus on creating a perfume, not really focus on finishing a fragrance as much as, keep on exploring materials, exploring how they behave in blends, exploring what, I can do on a specific theme. And then eventually I'll pick one that I like the most and explore why I like that, and learn a little bit more about those materials through learning why I like that. And then I start working on that one. So, it's a weird process, and I think every perfumer approaches it maybe slightly differently. But at the end of the day, it's still dumping a bunch of stuff in a jar, and in doing so, hopefully in an educated way. I think the challenging bit for me is like I said, more so about finishing a perfume, where I, I don't really spend a lot of time working on accords. I like to try to work on, accords within a formula, right? Within a full formula. That's just, it's probably not the best way to do it, honestly. I probably could stand to do a little bit more time exploring single accords. But, I guess I just prefer to I'm still very much in the stage where I really need to know what the materials are doing, and understand their relationships with each other, and how, changing the quantities, affects the performance and final results. So, in my own kind of drawn out, long, patient way, I guess I am working on accords. But yeah, I think, you can interpret different accords very differently too, and that's another bit of the complexity of the process. I think some accords lend themselves well to differing iterations of themselves, whereas some accords, like what John was talking about with fruit, you really kind of have to nail. If you're gonna make blueberry, blueberry is a very subtle scent, and it needs to be blueberry. It cannot be, it can't be dull blackberry. It needs to be blueberry.
Yeah.
Whereas jasmine or rose, again, or some herbs, some other many florals. I mean, some baseline accords like that can lend themselves well to being interpreted differently. You can make a very sheer, light, airy Jean-Claude Elena style jasmine note, or you can make a ridiculously skanky jasmine that's very indolic and very musky and very you're smelling it at night and it's blooming in full force. Or, you can kind of combine elements of both of those things and make a very, petally, it's blooming, but it opened a few hours ago kind of. And they all smell like jasmine, right? They all remind you of jasmine, or convincingly give off something jasmine-esque. Whereas you really, there are many brilliant minds out there. Maybe somebody can make a different kind of blueberry note, but I surely don't think that that's possible, having explored the note myself. It's a complex one that you don't see in many perfumes, and you don't see that for a reason. It is a difficult to make.
So Panda Fragrance here, how do you go about working with very expensive materials when building a fragrance? Do you often start with the base of less expensive materials and then start to test the naturals? So he or she is interested in sort of the process here. John, did you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a couple of ways to approach it. I'd say probably the way that I've worked my way into it, and again, this is similar to what JJ's mentioned, and I think Adam mentioned similarly, that some of these are really expensive. I think one of the most expensive I've worked with is Jonquil. That's gorgeous, and I love it, but it's unreally expensive. I did a really hysterical thing when I was making one of my perfumes, which has this in it. I was working in very small quantities in a small kind of the finished product I had was very small. And I was like, I nailed it. This is right. This is it. And then when I looked at the final math, I realized this was the most expensive perfume that I could, there was no way in hell anyone could afford this perfume, because just the amount of jonquil that I put in it was untenable. No one would be able to afford. I couldn't afford this perfume. Nobody could. So
wait a minute. Is this, didn't you diss it?
No, this is Vapor Syndrome.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I see what you mean, because that has Narcissus in it, which is a Narcissus accord, which I made, which is interesting. But that's a great accord that I worked a long time on that one. But
so what I'm hearing is we can expect an X-ray $400 a bottle version of Vaporo Syndro coming out pretty soon.
Which would be really funny. Yeah. Yeah, that would be great to do, actually. But so what I ended up realizing is that you have to, so it's one thing to dilute materials to a workable strength. And there are a lot of materials that have to be diluted because they're so damn strong in their natural state. And many of the natural ingredients are like that. For instance, something as simple as basil is just ridiculously strong in its pure form, and to my mind, really unpleasant in its pure form, and it only really takes on usable and nice characteristics until it's at least at 10%, if not lower. So you have to bring everything down to a workable percentage, but then that means everything needs to be brought down in percentage. So what the process I've ended up with, which is really different than how I began, is that I'm diluting all my materials down to roughly 10 or 20%, and then some even much, much, much lower as working level of dilutions. And then from there, really smelling very closely, I'm getting an idea of what a final product will smell like, because that's roughly where an extrait or eau de parfum version of something ends up being by the time it's diluted in alcohol anyway. And it does help you save tons and tons of money on ingredients, because even some of the synthetics that we use are also pretty expensive as well too, along with some of the natural ones.
Basic Morlaco says, I've noticed that perfumers pretty much are like orchestra conductors and have something they nail pretty well, like what Bernstein does to Mahler, what Ropion does to Rose. Okay, that's a good observation.
Yeah.
Why don't we explore the topic of reviewing? We're going to shift gears here from perfume making to sort of the back end, I guess, the recipient and what they perceive and what they have to say about it. Perfume reviewing or fragrance reviewing. And what does it mean to review fragrance? What's the purpose? What does it serve? I don't know, Adam, you and I have done a lot of, well, all three of us actually have done a lot of different reviewing, I suppose. What's your take on this topic of reviewing, the process, the purpose?
Well, I think every reviewer has their own personality, and that personality often informs the process and like the final results. And for me, I think the things that interest me about writing about perfume aren't just what is interesting to me about perfume. I think the thing that's interesting to me about writing about fragrance is that, you can tell many different kinds of stories with it, and you can kind of tell you can share parts of yourself through discussing the fragrance. And that's a really interesting aspect that I've been exploring a little bit lately. I will say there is sort of a delicate art in like not feeling like coming off like you're oversharing, or like not, making your review like into like a self-therapy session. That usually people tend to kind of pick up on that and don't always love that. And so that's something I'm a little weary of doing. But, I do think that, fragrance reviewing can be a very personal thing. And I enjoy when reviewers are a little bit more personal than, just talking about notes and just talking about how long those notes last on their skin. Because at the end of the day, I think if you're like so painfully technical in your review, there's a place for that. But, everybody has different associations with scent. And the problem is that when you review perfume, you cannot assume that you are objective, right? Or you cannot assume that you are describing something the way it is going to be experienced by another. Even if you're right, even if you know exactly what the formula of the fragrance is,
Right.
the way you describe the results of it on your skin or on a blotter is going to be different than the way somebody else it or makes the association. So that's actually funny. I would love to see like a bunch of perfume reviewers lined up in a room, but with little dividers between them, all smelling a fragrance, then looking at the formula, assuming that they all know a little bit about material.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like looking at the
yeah.
formula and then writing a review and then giving it to just random people who either like perfume or not, and just seeing what the different, iterations of knowledge that can be gained from such a process. I think it's really funny because no matter what you say, somebody's not going to agree, and somebody's going to agree wholeheartedly, and most people fall right in the middle. So I take like an approach or a mindset of, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. I'm going to share a little part of myself when I do it, and I am going to hopefully tell an interesting story. And that's the best I can hope to do, really.
What you really bring into focus is, how prepared is the reviewer? I think anybody technically can review a fragrance. They can say as little or as much as they want, I suppose, if it smells good to them, or what they think they detect in it, or how well they think it does the job for them or does the trick, if we're looking at more the results-driven aspect of fragrance. But I like to explore, I've wanted to explore this topic a little bit more on, should there be credentials, if any at all, in being a thorough reviewer? I was thinking to myself, with those who are film critics, a film critic isn't going to necessarily just do a review on the cinematography. They're not going to talk at great length about just the lighting and just the imagery and just, the direction. I'm going to talk about a lot of other things that are going on: the acting, the plot, the adaptation, if it's from a book. There's all these things that come into play. So often what I think with reviewing, and maybe sort of a strong opinion, is that I don't think that it's a really effective review if you're not taking, a number of things into consideration, including how did it make you feel? What did it evoke? And I don't really hear enough of that sometimes. I don't hear it in a lot of reviews. It seems very, like I think that some people, they've read the ad copy, they have the notes breakdown, they have the notes pyramid, they wear it, and they pretty much just have all their cheat sheet in front of them, but they're not stepping outside of that, or maybe, setting that aside. It's okay to use it to a degree, but let's kind of, what I'm talking about? I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You either don't get any of that, like you said, or, you get on the opposite extreme, you get like a very hyper specific scenario. And listen,
that's true too. Yeah.
I've described hyper specific scenarios, but I'd like to think that I try to just, if you're going to take that route, you got to describe all the details. You got to relate. You have to have found a fragrance that fits all of those details, and then you can explore what the fragrance is by revealing some of those details of your little hyper specific story.
Yeah.
But often what you do get is somebody just talking about how they were in their grandmother's 1949 old Cape house with XYZ type of carpeting and a pet who peed on it in 1950. Like that kind of thing. And it can be very, very, very specific. And then you're kind of left wondering, well, does it really smell like all that?
Right.
And also, you seem to be enjoying that. I don't even know if I will, if I'm the reader, right? So it's sort of, there's a delicate balance between like, talking about how it makes you feel and, maybe things that it reminds you of, versus like remembering that there's a person on the other end of your review, like watching or reading, and how can you hold their attention, how can you hold their respect, and how can you successfully communicate something to them. Right?
Exactly. So basically what we're talking about is voice and how we use that voice to connect to our audience, the person who's going to be reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this, anybody can write, anybody can write a review in Fragrantica, Base Notes, anywhere, Instagram, right? Their thoughts and everything. But I think about writing because we talk about writing. We talk about voice and connecting with our audience and writing. So is it important to have writing ability? I don't know. I don't want to sound like a snob. Like, you must have writing skills to be able to do a review. But does that help? I mean, like, you're conveying something. How much of that comes into play? How important is that? John, what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I would say, if we look at reviewing, if we expand it a bit also to people who make videos and whatnot, I mean, you have a medium that you're using to express some thoughts you have about an object. In this case, it's a time-based medium like fragrance, which has a lifespan, and it's got, and you want to reflect on it, and it's got creative parts to it you want to talk about, and you have a reaction to it, all those different things. And you have to convey that some way to an audience. I think a component we hadn't mentioned here is it's really important to know who your audience is. But in that process of conveying it, you're either going to do it well or not. And part of the way you do it well, how do you do it well, right? I think you do it well by the audience saying, he or she or they did that well, right? And I have a sense now of what that fragrance is, and I either will never touch it because of what they said, it sounds disgusting, or it sounds really pleasant, and I want to be part of that experience, or whatever in between. Or they may say that I'm totally indifferent to what I just read. But I guess you've made a convincing or compelling case for what you just talked about, and you have to have. I don't know if this has to do with skill of writing or skill of or your skill of speaking. Or presenting yourself on video or whatever it is. But if you are good at conveying an idea, you have to be good at conveying an idea, whatever form that takes, so I guess even if you have some level of skill at communication, that would be great. I'll give you a really funny example. So one of our co-writers that Adam and I work with, Matt Udov, who a writer from Russia, he's also a fragrance he's more or less a fragrance chemist, a really brilliant writer, very funny writer. And in the studio he works at, there's a guy who, I think he's the guy who basically keeps the doors locked, and he's more or less the sort of like super for the building. And he has two reactions to when he gives him something to smell. He'll talk to this guy, and I think his name is like Yuri or something. He says, "Yuri, what do you think of this?" And Yuri says either like, "That's great," or like, "That smells awful." And those are his only reactions to the things he gives him to smell. And we like together as a group, when a bunch of us were together in Italy, we all said, "That's fantastic. We need to hire this guy. Like, that's brilliant," because sometimes what a great reviewer this would be. Like, Yuri says yes, Yuri says no. Like, I mean, in a way, part of me thought that would cut through all the bullshit, right? It would just be like a perfect reviewer. Now, mind you, is that the only kind of reviewing we should have? No, of course not. But I really liked Yuri's approach, that it was either a yes or a no for him. But I'm sort of joking, but I do have a point there in that I don't think that you do necessarily have to have these amazing chops if you're an effective communicator. I liked his style. So in my sense, I thought that was pretty effective.
It can be, especially if you feel like you have some trust in their perception.
Right.
That sometimes, I guess depending upon who it is, if they have a lot of experience under their belt sniffing stuff, you just go by them saying like, "This smells, beautiful. This stinks. This is awful." Yeah, and that's all I need to say about it.
Well, I think what was interesting to me is I like that kind of sort of man on the street, person on the street approach to smelling, which I think. I want to tie it a little bit back to what Adam was saying. Like, for a long time when I started writing, I was really cautious about not involving personal stories. Like, I really thought, I'm not going to touch my own personal perception because I'm obviously dealing with my own personal perception, but I don't want to tell stories from my own life. And then I thought, gosh, it's an awful stuffy way to approach writing. I'm being so careful not to get myself involved too much. Then I started to slowly bring in little anecdotes about, things that have happened in my life. And I've reached a balance where I like the amount of where I talk a little bit about revelations of myself or how something made me think or feel, and enough of what I think is more just objective information that I'm providing about what I'm smelling, and I think maintaining that balance is something I'll never, ever quite feel like I've got it perfect. And that's probably why I keep writing, because I really like exploring the balance between those two things.
Right.
Well, you just said a very important verb in the word of exploring. I think something that helps, a reviewer out is if they have a strong sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if you were to draw one very, very broad picture of perfume fans, I think it could be the color of curiosity, right? I think people are generally in this hobby at least somewhat curious. I think you kind of have to be to really find it an obsession worthy passion, right? And it certainly rewards curiosity, whether you are creating them or just smelling them, or in fact writing about them. And I think that that's an important trait if you are definitely seriously considering, doing any kind of speaking or writing about fragrances, that, you need to be curious. You need to have some amount of patience with yourself to say, well, is what I'm immediately thinking about this, really how I feel about it, is what I am thinking right now the results of wearing and experiencing the fragrance, or is it the results of the research I did leading up to acquiring a sample of it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there are many different factors, but I think that the through line for good reviewers tends to involve, to some extent, some amount of curiosity and to some extent tenacity.
Yeah, curiosity is a great word, Adam. And actually, that reminded me of a great experience I had where this was I think prior to when I started writing for Fragrantica, or it may have been just after I started writing. The first time I got a sample of Santal 33, which is one of my really disliked fragrances. And there's not many that I dislike actively, but I just don't like that fragrance. And there's just a handful that I dislike.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write about what I disliked about it. And I thought, God, this is really hard. It's much easier to talk about things you like. And I painted this elaborate picture of what this was. And I created this setting of a really kind of disheveled seaside Japanese restaurant in sort of northern Japan that kind of had its heyday in the 1970s. And you get stale pickles and stale mustard and stale wasabi and kind of rancid oil that various foods are fried in, and kind of like a really chewy tonkatsu served to you and stuff, and like all of in this like kind of not the best seaweed and all of that. Like, this was Santal 33 for me, but I really worked hard on this explanation of why I didn't like it. I'm really proud of myself for having gone through the effort to not just say this sucks, but what actually am I pulling out of this? Why does it make me think of this very sad, kind of very cinematic sort of, like sad Japanese restaurant where love is doomed to fail and things like that.
I kind of love that. I wish that you followed through with that, because
I think there's remnants of it on like a personal review that I wrote on the site somewhere, which, but there are notes trapped away somewhere. I don't know. Maybe I'll get somebody who loves it on our team, and we'll both write a for and against format, which would to be somewhat fair. But
Panda Fragrance says, reviewing art, perfume art, wine, film, tends to evoke very extreme ends, either very technical or very personal. My favorite reviewers can tell a story that still has some utility to a reader. Yeah, balance. Yeah. I can get technical sometimes because I have that background of picking up on certain things that maybe, I know for certain come from my smelling materials in isolation, and I wonder to myself, like, is this going to be useful to the reader? I don't know, I'll just throw that in, and then I'll give a little tutorial on it, like, what is this that I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't want to kind of keep on going and going. I'll choose like maybe one that might stand out to me, or might be kind of like a good sort of like little lesson on something that's common in perfumery. Right. But then I want to kind of sort of tie it back into something that's a little bit more accessible to the reader. Just like all of us have like a very different style in the way that we write. Callie's Groom Room, Dave, I love the personal connection between myself and perfume. Could be memories, feelings, transportive, mental clarity. Tammy, oh my God, John Biebel. Aloha, John. Such a delight to see you here. I wish I had a bigger bottle of Attrape.
Oh, hey, Tammy, how are you?
And Basic Morlaco, a perfume reviewer should have a special antenna for the subtle vibrations of existence. Literature, music, art, all that is human, is whatever shines light upon the language. Definitely don't frown upon integrating other media, which it makes for a great segue into the discussion of perfume and integrating it with other media, which is another topic that John had suggested that I thought it was a brilliant idea. And this pretty much involves partnering, say, perfume with music or with visual art or film, you name it. And I know, John, you yourself, you actually released an album, Gong, that was the accompaniment to one of your fragrance releases. So you've explored this yourself. Tell me a little bit of what inspired you to do sort of this pairing between music and fragrance.
Yeah, sure. To be really frank, and I hope I'm not being TMI here, but I got up in the middle of the night to take a piss, and sometimes when you do that, you get these moments of clarity because you're just you can't concentrate on anything but just you're looking at outside. And as I was doing that, I had been working on this perfume formula, and I thought, oh my God, I had this image in my head of some person playing a gong, and it was a crystallization of things. And I thought, oh, okay, this is exactly the sound that should accompany the fragrance that I am doing. And I started off with this very small idea, like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if I recorded a couple of gongs and I put out a little MP3, and it was just a sort of, little, kind of giveaway with the fragrance or something like that. And of course, being the way that I am, I always take something to an extreme. And in a few days, I had bought multiple gongs, and I started recording music again, which I hadn't done in about like 7 or 8 years. And it just escalated like crazy. And before I knew it, there was an entire album's worth of music, which was utterly unexpected and wild, but really fun because I didn't think that Perfume would be a starting point for such a thing. It never struck me that would ever happen, but it did. So what I think I learned from the process, along with just enjoying how it opened up like that, was that the Perfume became a major catalyst for other creative ventures. Just I didn't expect it to happen, and suddenly this new thing happened. So what it also opened up for me too was that I like the idea that Perfume can be a starting point for collaborations with other people, that it can mean it can be part of other works of art. It can be like a work of art of its own. And it kind of opened me up to the idea of working with other people, like working with a producer and a mixer. And I did 2 short films to promote, like one of the limited edition perfumes, and one of the songs that was on the album I did a short film about. So it was really cool to just experience that. But I wanted to also just quickly add that I also think this is where Perfume is moving. I think that Perfume is particularly in this digital age, we have so much access to media now that people want more information about a fragrance than just a list of notes in a bottle. They're very excited about the idea that it exists in other forms, whether it is whether it is reviews and whether it is music, whether it is like visual components, whether it is something more than just something you buy on an online store or you look at a pyramid of notes about. You there?
Oh, hey, Curly Pop. Yo, yo, yo. Good to see you here. I love the idea of integrating other media into Perfume, and I'm inclined to agree that this may be more the wave of the future. Integrations of the sort, and I was mentioning to you the other night, John, and even my perfume reviewing and my writing, I'm reaching for different pieces, different music pieces to convey how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes I feel that it's best said through almost directing, the reader to listen to this track. And somehow, imagine, if this evokes a certain feeling for you, the way that it evokes a feeling for me, what I'm basically sharing with you is as close to what I'm experiencing through this scent.
Mm-hmm.
However, you're listening to it through music rather than smelling it. I just like that whole concept. And Adam, have you thought about doing something that sort of integrates other media into your perfume, into your creations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I am a huge music fan, so that definitely comes to mind, among other art forms. But music is a hugely important thing to me. I'm a big, when I listen to music, I typically get kind of hooked on, textures and sound, and maybe that's just like the result of maybe being a little bit like ADD and just like having those effects sort of like trickle into other areas of my life. But I do think that like there's this element of like texture that I really enjoy about perfume and in sound. Obviously they're two different things, but the idea of texture in both of them fascinates me. And I definitely am the type of person who will like hear one part of a song and go, oh, I really like that little sound. Like it could be just like the way a drum is played, maybe with a brush or something instead of a stick. But it could be a really small detail like that. And that kind of gets me going. Or it can be just like the combination therein to make like an atmosphere in the song, and similarly an atmosphere in scent too. So I'm really interested in the synergies there. Something that I will no doubt eventually do when I do have my line released is create like a little sub smaller line that's like a song series where it'll be designed after certain songs. In fact, I'm trying to talk myself out of just designing a few different perfumes related to a whole album. There's this album that I really like by he's the lead guitarist of Fleet Foxes, which is one of my favorite bands, but he has his own like solo stuff, and he's like not as anywhere near as well known as his parent band, unfortunately, but he's a great musician, and he has this album called Back in Heaven, and the artist is I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Skylar Skelset, with a J in there thrown randomly. But the album is Back in Heaven, and the thing about this album is that like every song sounds like a perfume to me. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm saying those words. I don't know how those things can be logically put together, but it just rings true for me. And I definitely want to create like at least a few fragrances based off of songs on that album. Now, I will say the funny thing about it, and probably the thing that helps this concept along, is the fact that Back in Heaven as an album features song titles that are excellent perfume titles. So there's like a lot of relation in between them. So there's one song called All Roses, and I just imagine what a fragrance called All Roses would smell like. I mean, it's probably good. The result is probably good. Actually, it's funny. There's a song called HK Iris, which sounds like it would be a perfume name of like one of these ultra modern niche, like minimal aesthetic brands. There's a song called Cobalt. There's a song called The Angel, and a song called Sunflower. I think any one of these would probably make a very good inspiration for a fragrance, and at some point I will be finalizing a few of them, at least all roses. I think I have to do all roses. That's a great.
I think that's a good challenge for you there to
Oh, it's a
match
huge
all
challenge. I
roses. Yeah.
I'm kind of terrified of doing it. But
Gentlemen, I'm going to step away for just a short time, maybe about 30 seconds, but please continue to carry on with this and I will be right back.
Absolutely. Adam, that I really like what you were just saying about potential perfume compositions based upon songs, or also like particular bits of sound that kind of interests you. And I'm thinking of tying that back into textures. Do you find like sort of a spatial or textural component to sound that you find a kind of equivalent sort of something in smell as well?
yeah, I think with smell it's a little bit more hard to place, hard to pin.
Mm-hmm.
But I think fragrance, it's a hard question to answer, John, because like we still don't, even as perfume reviewers and people who dabble in it ourselves, we still struggle to sometimes find language to describe certain elements of how perfume behaves. But I will say, I think fragrance has like movement. You know, some fragrances have like a very eerie kind of hovering quality. Typically, those that contain a lot of ambergris or ambergris accords, but
Mm-hmm.
it has, and certainly other materials are responsible for this as well. But like this idea of like it hits you and then it goes away and it hovers around on your skin and it's like very light and ethereal, but also has a certain weight to it. And it's like fogginess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's light coming through it and you can kind of smell through it to smell other parts of the composition,
Mm-hmm.
but it still sort of clouds around wherever you're spraying it from, and you sometimes only get little bits and whiffs of it. I think that kind of smell can be translated very easily into certain sounds in music, and certainly there's an idea of if the perfume is doing that a lot. I associate that with having movement as well as texture, right?
Yeah.
If the fragrance is sort of, if you're not putting your nose directly to it, how does it hit you? How does it waft? Does it have? It's more than just sillage. It's like sort of what the sillage is doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally hear what you're saying. That's pretty fascinating too. Yeah, because that's all about, sounds like all about texture basically from what you said. Yeah.
I by Brian mentions there's a reviewer in Fragrantica whose reviews are solely the
Oh
name of a
yeah.
painting that the frag presumably evokes. I know who this is, and it's Alpha, and his picture is an image of this cartoon. I think it's a cartoon from Sweden called Alphonse Alberg, and it's a little guy, and he's like this. He's like, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't remember his name, and I love his reviews, and he actually motivates me to, what is this painting? And I look at the painting and I put the two together, and I'm like, okay. And if I'm already familiar with the fragrance, I'm like, I think he's on to something. Yeah, he's great. He's great. Rachel says, off topic, but I'd love to know what working with the material roasted seashells is like, thinking of smolder rose. Now I'm thinking of like a Choyanak.
Yeah.
Choyanak, yeah.
Yeah. It's so Rachel, it's a good question. And it's kind of funny because I was talking with another independent perfumer, Hans Henley, who we were laughing because he said, I've worked with this material and I don't know what I could possibly do with it. And similarly, he's worked with materials that I don't know what to do with. But so there's these various extractions that come. They're all made in India, and it's a fairly ancient technique with I forget the actual name of it, but it's a kind of a distillation. What's the name, Adam? You might know this, or JJ. It's that distillation vessel that kind of has a round bottom and then a crooked neck that goes like that, but it's a clay distillation.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but the name escapes me. But that's how those choyas are.
Yeah, it's called a destructive distillation. So the stuff inside is burnt, and the distillate is then mixed in with an oil. It's usually done with a certain oil. And so what you're just left with is kind of like this wet ash essentially, but there's also a distillation made of cedar wood. That's a destructive distillation. But what comes out of it is this incredibly smoked material that's then more or less the particulate is in oil through the distillation process, and then it's filtered and refined, and you're left with this really fascinating sort of byproduct of the process itself and some of the material itself, like the natural kind of saline and chalkiness and silica kind of quality of seashells mixed in along with the actual burning that occurs when it's distilled. So it's it's a pretty wild product. They're very strong and peculiar smelling, and they have to be used, carefully, I guess.
Oh, I know that the choya nok is very strong. A tiny amount is really potent.
Yeah.
And then there's also choya ral, choya luban.
Right.
The other two are a little easier to work with, and I think one of them uses frankincense, another one has maybe sandalwood or something. Yeah. But that choya nok is one of the most unique perfume materials I've ever smelled. So I imagine you didn't really need to use too much for it to have an effect.
No, not really. Unfortunately, I was able to get quite a bit of it, and also I have a colleague who goes regularly to India, and so I'm able to get some directly from India, where you're able, where it's coming from, and it comes from like kind of a local source as well too, and made locally, which is nice.
I will petition for JJ to have a fragrance show in NPR. It will do well, no trolling.
I'm gonna need you to do the voice then. I'm gonna need you to try this. This is amazing. I think it's a wonderful idea, by the way.
I kind of felt like I already did have the voice.
You do. You do. But I can imagine you like trying really hard to like do an add on to it. You know what I mean? Like I can imagine you at the radio station being like, is that now?
This is a delicious dish. You remember Delicious Dishes? Saturday Night Live. It's very nice.
Callie's asked me a question too. If I play an instrument, I wanted to let people know. If you ask me a question, I don't have access to the chat for whatever reason. Whenever I try to sign in to one of these, I cannot access the chat. But what I will say is that kind of. My answer is kind of. I've been playing the baritone uke for a number of years, not particularly well, but I can get along, and I am slowly but surely teaching myself the guitar.
Very nice. Rachel has another off-topic question. Nothing's really off-topic here unless it's not about fragrance. That's a little dig on those who think a live stream can't have fragrance discussion for too long. All fragrance all the time until the very last minute. For perfumers who work with lots of naturals, how do you work with structure to provide lift and separation to create an articulate scent? Either one of you want to tackle that one?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I mean, I've made some compositions that have a lot more naturals than some others do, and I think Adam was mentioning before that whole finger painting problem you get, where essentially everything turns to gray or brown or mud or something, and that's a real problem of all natural material, and that's actually interesting because it's also the strength of natural materials is that you have so much in there. Synthetic materials tend to be pretty clean cut. There's no sort of extraneous material, whereas there's tons of stuff. Indeed, there's a lot of extraneous material in a natural that is kept in the natural extraction, right, which probably is what gives it its character. It gives it its lack of how can you say it? Like, I've had cases where I love using coriander, cardamom. Those are two naturals I can't get enough of, and pink pepper. And it's sometimes I'll buy coriander and it's very different from another batch that I have or another supplier I found or something. And that's hard. So naturals can be really inconsistent, and which is difficult, So that's both a good and a bad part of it. But to get to your question, though, I think what ends up happening is that perfumers have to think really carefully about top notes. And of course, there are fewer top notes than, oh, hey, Marcel, how are you? There are fewer top notes than any other of the notes, which some people don't know. Like we have loads and loads and loads and loads of bass notes. There's so many bass notes. It's ridiculous, but there's not many top notes. And for naturals workers, there's even fewer. You just have a lot of citruses essentially, and frankincense and a couple other things, which can sort of operate on a top note level. So you do have to really think hard about your top notes, and then things that will merge well from the top to the middle. So and you've got to test your fragrance and a lot. You've got to give it a lot of road miles to see how it works on skins and whatnot. And also, I think a lot of people who make naturals are not, they take the idea of fragrance longevity kind of out of the whole hierarchy of needs, because it's just not usually going to have that, crazy longevity that some people are used to from a lot of commercial perfumes nowadays. They just don't really operate in that fashion. I think certain things have lent it so, like sandalwood certainly adds it. Ambergris does. Some oud can last a very long time, beautifully so. But I think you create a slightly more of a roller coaster ride with a natural composition, where you may have a really bright beginning with something like orange, just like pure orange peel, and then a nice kind of like throbbing kind of vibrato in the center of like, a bit of orris, kind of an orris root, and maybe like a tea tincture and some rose and whatnot, and then something that really is a nice humming sensation at the bottom of like a nice buttery sandalwood and some or like a violet leaf into some sandalwood and a bit of patchouli or something like that. So you can do it. It will just be a different experience, I think. That was really long-winded. Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. What is Victoria's secret? John, I was really excited when I heard you were combining music, because I compose inspired from my time film scoring. I found they cool. both melded together. It's great.
Cool. Very cool.
And then Basic Morlocco has some great ones this evening. What about the gray area that exists in perfumery, which is plagiarism? There's a thin line between inspiration and cloning. That's a controversial one, but who wants to?
Well, except I know what you mean, I guess, about the thin line between them, but at the same time, is it that thin? Because I feel like most of the clone houses market themselves pretty straightforwardly as a clone house. I think, there are perfumes that tend to smell like each other. There are fragrances that, if given enough time, I'm sure the perfume community could find and list many, many fragrances from disparate houses that smell similarly, or at least have very similar aspects. Maybe they go in different directions, but they have one thing at the middle that aligns. I don't count that. I don't count that. And honestly, I think there's also something to be said about a perfumer in their hubris smelling a fragrance and saying, "I like many parts of this. I don't like other parts of this. I can do part of this better," and then trying to do it. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, again, it's a little prideful, but I think it's wonderful. And I think that honestly, it should be done more. I think, I would love to, smell some interesting indie perfume. I could list many, but there are many indie perfumers who I follow whatever they release, not necessarily because I like everything they release, but because their approach interests me. And if they want to do a take on something, then I'll still smell it, right? And by the way, it isn't so thin because, what would we be without all of the beautiful eau de cologne style perfumes out there, right? Like where there's a huge blast of citrus and maybe some herbs and spices mixed in, maybe an errant floral or two, but that's the basic structure, right? And so I would argue that the line between copying and the line between copying and styles and stylistic choices is thinner than the line between quote unquote copying or imitating some things versus actual cloning. I think cloning has to do with people trying to profit off of another's work and do it in a quote unquote cheaper way that's more affordable, versus copying is something all artists do, in some way or another. So I think the line is maybe not as thin as you might think.
No, and also, we already full well know that you can't patent scent. You can't. As much as somebody might have what seems to be a unique idea, many of this is just handed down from other perfumers. If you look at what has happened in perfumery since, the dawn of commercial perfumery, I don't know what date you could put on that, 200 years ago, that these ideas are passed down and people just do variations on these ideas, and they become sort of traditions, and they become trends, and then they get out of fashion and they come back into fashion, and people add a little bit of this and remove a little bit of that. And that's been happening, since time immemorial. That's the way it is in so many different forms of art. So if you smell something that smells very similar to something else, it's really just their take on this concept or idea, the style. Mm-hmm. And that's why there are things like chypres and fougères and ambers and orientals, or whatever you want to call them, the citrus aromatics, as you mentioned. Every house wanted to do their own take. Every house, every fashion house or perfume house wanted to get their piece of the pie. And in studying perfume for so many decades, I've noticed that they'll do their own version. This is me too. Me too. I want one on the market as well. Here's ours. See if you like ours. Might think it's better. And it's just been happening over and over again. So, today in the market, not like the clone thing is new either, because that's been around for ages too, as far back as the 40s. As far back, and then, a lot of them were heavily commercialized, Parfums Decor, and they'd have commercials on television about how, if you like Giorgio, you love Primo. As long as there's obviously like a transparency about it, I don't know. I don't see it as like a huge threat. I guess it just depends on whether or not there is that transparency, or they are making, or they're not trying to pass it off as if it their own original product, which I guess is happening as well. And people have a right to complain about that when they call BS. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I had two thoughts. So the first one was that there's a paradox in the case you just mentioned, JJ, where somebody would try to pass off a copy of something as their own, because usually the whole reason someone makes a copy is that they want to say, buy this because it smells just like that. So that's usually the marketing ploy. Or they want the market to acknowledge, like, oh, wow, notice that this tends to smell like that. And if you look at YouTube, it does seem to work that way, doesn't it? I can't count the videos I've seen saying, hey, do you like this? Buy this instead. And it's being an influencer is actually doing that as their video content. The other thing I want to say, though, is I want to be really careful of us getting too pessimistic, though, because I think there are loads of creative things as yet undone. I wouldn't be bothering to make anything if I thought that all we're doing is just a revisionist version of things. I mean, because one thing I want to say that I really enjoyed about, like, I was a judge for Art and Olfaction Awards last year, and I think what was so exciting is that the level of creativity was really unreal, and some of the submissions were genuinely surprising, and things that I had just never expected, and different approaches to perfume that were so off the wall that in fact somebody who is on the team said, as a guide for me about the judging, said, if you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and you find yourself still thinking about like one thing you smelled, that's a really good sign that this has made a mark for you. And I literally was saying, oh my God, that thing I smelled yesterday, this is fantastic. And so it really it made me think a lot about how there's a lot of unexplored territory out there in perfume. So I don't necessarily think that everything's been done. I do think there's a lot of repetition in perfume.
Yeah.
Question, but I'm really excited about new territory. Really excited about that. So
that perhaps there could be whole new approaches or styles, like something, there is this uncharted territory, and it's just a matter of whether or not we're taking advantage of what is at our disposal that maybe we haven't had for the past 100, 200 years. There's a lot of advancements in scent technology and things that we could do that we couldn't do even 5 or 10 years ago. So
right. And also I think just our imaginations and palettes and what we're willing to consider is perfume have expanded quite a bit in recent years.
Well, that's why I think it's amusing, when you have these like steadfast kind of gatekeeping vintage types are like, I remember when perfumery used to be an art. And the irony of that is I feel like perfumery has been more artful and artisanal in the past 20 years than it had been ever before, because there had become like a market for it. There had become like an accessibility for somebody to become an independent perfumer in ways that were not quite possible before. So you're seeing the most innovative and artful types of perfumery in recent years. I think that's a little bit more nuanced than just saying that it just used to be so much better in the past. Right. And now, commercial, and you don't have to focus on commercial perfumery, And even then with commercial perfumery, I don't think it's all 100% bad either. You just have to pay attention.
Right.
Clandestine laboratories here. So I actually will have Mark Sage next week. He'll be the guest panelist. He'll be joining us. He says, I think this used to be true regarding influence and styles, but with the advent of GCMS, that has changed. Access to this, I don't know. Do you think that it's true that a lot of these dupe or clone houses, do they have access to GCMS, or are they just doing these approximations to the best of their ability here?
I think they have access to it. Yeah, you can buy like home. You still have to do pretty decent investment in this stuff, but you can buy home analysis setups or smaller scale lab setups to do your own analysis that can give you a relatively good reading. I do want to say though, and I think JJ, you have mentioned this too, that just getting a readout of the blueprint essentially of a fragrance, it still requires a lot of skill to take that and make it into a final perfume. Right. It's not a 1-for-1. It's not going to just give you literally a blueprint of like add 3 drops of that and 2 grams of this, and it's not that simple. It's quite complex.
Because 20 of those components could be derived from one natural material, right? And it's like putting together a very difficult puzzle. So I'd imagine that, for some people who can do this well, there's a certain skill, there's a talent to this reconstruction or doing this reconstruction as best as they can. And I think that a nose can tell, or at least like an experienced, not experiences in like perfumer experience. I'm talking about like somebody might get a clone and think to themselves like, yeah, nice try, but not quite. And they kind of miss the mark. And maybe the most successful ones are the ones that actually can be that convincing. Basic Morlaco says in the Rasasi webpage, the description of La Yucawam explicitly details the fragrance as a creation of their own, no credit given to Tuscan leather at all. But we don't know what little bit of difference this La Yucawam would be to Tuscan leather. And I think technically if they're reconstructing it and they don't have the exact formula, then they can kind of get away with it. I know it seems kind of crappy, but it is kind of original if they didn't really create it, to the very little minute detail. I don't know.
As much as of a distaste as I have for the clone houses, I will say it's funny because, I don't think the perfume community would really respond well if perfumes could be trademarked, if the formulas to them could be. That is,
Interesting.
perfume community seems to have a lot of misconceptions about, the standards and the restrictions that are placed on fragrance and fragrance materials.
Mhm.
And so, hey, if you don't like IFRA, you're really going to hate it if there's a board that governs, perfume formulas being,
Right.
privatized. I don't know. I want the artistic merit to be given its merit. I also don't necessarily think that trademarking fragrances is the way to do it.
No, that seems like a slippery slope. That doesn't seem like it would be a good future for perfumery.
I think a lot of styles would become, locked out and gate kept. So
actually, Adam, that's a fantastic arrangement, because what if like a certain kind of fougere structure suddenly becomes like bought up, right, by somebody as, this is now property of Coty or something, right?
Yeah, that's no good at all.
Didn't realize how many feelings I had about this topic until you brought
Well,
it up.
it's funny, this topic, it surfaces even when I don't have it on the agenda. It surfaces. This is a hot topic. One night, and it was like 3 weeks ago, it was actually on the roster for what to discuss. But I think a lot of people have a lot to say about it in their opinions, and some people are opinionated to the point where they feel like it is, an invasion that is taking away the attention from smaller scale independent perfumers, and which, I could see that argument, and people have a right to their opinion on that. It's crazy, how devout, maybe as devout as people are to niche and artisanal perfumers, how devout people are to clone houses too. That they'll defend it to the end, and they're right to do that, and they're right to be consumers of it. And we've talked about in the past about having accessibility to perfume to a lower income segment. That there are a lot of people who just can't afford to get a fragrance that is of a certain cost that's out of reach to them, so they have that alternative. So people advocate for its existence because of that. I don't know, how do you guys feel about that?
Well, Basic Morlocco actually just said another interesting comment.
He has a lot of them.
It's your fault. You got us on this topic to begin with. He says, they say you can't copy ideas for books. You can't rephrase jokes and stand-up comedy and pass them as your own. And if I was the perfumer for Aventus, I'd be a little bit annoyed. Yes and no. I think, when to use the analogy of other art forms, there are many authors who become frustrated when a book that they write is so successful that there's like people dressing up at cons as characters from it, or writing a lot of fan fiction about it. And I think it depends on who you are as a person. If you're the perfumer behind Aventus, for example, I really hope that the perfumer for Aventus is a really chill person, because honestly, they invented a category more than they invented a perfume at this point. Say what you want about it. I don't have any particularly strong feelings for or against Aventus, but I will say that, it is sort of, it's not that there are a million clones of Aventus now. Now there are just, it's just a category, and it's just, if I were the perfumer personally, I think I'd be complimented by that.
Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. If people are imitating your work, then hey,
are the people who first quote unquote copied it or made their own quote unquote version of Aventus maybe more to blame? Maybe. But again, I think at this point, it's not necessarily imitation anymore. It is, Aventus is like a fougere. Aventus is like a chypre. Aventus is like any other category of fragrance out there. It is such a ubiquitous thing now,
right,
that it's not that people necessarily just want to release a perfume that smells like Aventus. They want to make a style of perfume now.
Well, it's like Fougere Royale. Everybody was copying that. Sheepla, Coty, Sheepla, earliest Sheeper style fragrances like that. Everybody was copying that.
Mhm.
Everybody was, oh my God, I was just doing some research on some fragrances of the early 80s. Do you know how many copies of Opium / Cinnabar there was of varying levels of commercial success?
Mm.
It's just happens in business and also in literature too. I hate to say it. I mean, maybe, more like pulp kind of literature, like, but it happens in that too. It happens in film. It happens in all types of media, that there's going to be imitations. They're going to see that something was proven to be successful and they're going to want, the action. But I guess it's the discerning consumer to decide if it's worth their while to have the imitation or to have what they consider to be the original. And it's up to them to decide, what is of more value to them. What value do they put on fragrance to begin with? Some people just want to smell like it. They don't care if it's the original or the imitation.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to get back to, which I don't have an answer to, but it was an interesting question you raised, because I'm curious, and I said I think it's more of a kind of like intellectual exercise, and I've wondered about this myself, is this whole notion of, you said, make affordable choices for people, right?
Yeah.
But it brings up a very funny question where what the implied point is you're making is that people have an inherent birthright to Aventus, which is really right. When you think about that, it's really very funny, right? It's like,
it is. That's why I the more I think about that whole concept, it is kind of amusing.
Which is sort of like saying that, everyone has a birthright to caviar or something. Like I
was going to mention caviar. Yeah.
Like I don't eat caviar. I can't afford it, right? Like, and I guess I'm not, and of course I'm being tongue in cheek about this, in the sense that, I mean, we have a lot of these competing ideas. Like, we'll often say perfume is a luxury, and then, well, yes, but shouldn't everybody have access to perfume? Or perfume's a commodity and a product, anybody can copy it. It's a thing. And then on the other side, people saying perfume deserves authorship. The creator of the perfume should be on every bottle. Like, these very kind of contradictory or slightly paradoxical notions that, like, do we care as much, for example, about the authorship of an Aventus clone? Probably not, right? Than the artist of a very like niche perfume. They're kind of strange concepts, and I'm also trying to square all of this in my own head as well. I don't have an answer to this. What I counter sometimes the argument about, should there be affordable versions of fragrances for everybody, is that I think there already are tons of great affordable.
Exactly, that's true.
That probably much more interesting, than let's say an Aventus clone, that I would probably steer someone into, like, hey, there's this really great affordable fragrance that you should buy, as opposed to buying an Aventus clone. I mean, again, Aventus clones are great, but I mean, I would say you're better off buying like a Lalique. Why am I blanking on the name? But Encre Noire.
Encre Noire, yeah.
That's not an Aventus clone, but it's like sort of a dark kind of. It's of the same ilk, if you will.
Right.
Ish. Like, you'd be better off buying that and really enjoying that necessarily than looking for a cheaper knockoff. But that's my take on it, and I just want to say it's a very open question, and I don't think we're going to answer that tonight.
No, and I don't want to either, because it's belabored enough.
But I was yes and yes.
Anuj Patel, yes. In my opinion, clone houses in the modern industry help to keep designer brands on their toes. You step your game up, and the public can make their own choice. I think that is a good. That's a good point. Yeah. And but also we can do quite creative tincturing to add longevity and interest. I think this is actually a side conversation out of context. So
no, that's part of the natural perfume discussion we were having.
Yes. And Catch My Whiff says, "Catch my whiff." I like how he has Big Ben. I love that. I have purchased a few clones in the past, but mostly stay away now. I can't afford if I can't afford a full bottle of the original, I'll generally stay away. Also, what happened to like decants? Like, there's a whole community Just decant, trade, sample.
Yeah.
Create, you have a little sample collection. Like, I don't expect the world to be some sort of nut who's collecting a whole bunch of bottles like me. Like not all of us, need to consume perfume the same way. Don't feel like you're missing out because you don't have something in your physical possession in a large quantity. Share decants, get samples, smaller quantities. Just get that's why I'm always about, like, if you're a house and you can do it, give a smaller quantity. You don't need the larger one. You don't need to commit to that. There's so many ways around this. And like John said, so many different smaller houses. I even think of like that house L'Herballario. It was a really nice house out of Italy. And the fragrances are really quite nice and they're pretty cheap. Like, there's houses like that where it's like, if you can't afford to spend like $150 or $200, it's not like you're missing out on the creme de la creme, because you can seek out some great fragrances out there at a lower price point for sure. And Margie Noir, exactly, JG's up to the person to decide how much it is worth to them. It's true. It is the consumer, it is the individual who imparts value onto something. So you can reflect on whether or not it's important for you to have the facsimile of something rather than the original, or whether you just discover something entirely different that is original that you can afford. That's another way of going about it. Basic Marlaco, as a businessman, I'm not impressed by someone capitalizing on my product just because there isn't any way to patent my creation. They shouldn't get away with not paying a penny. I get it. I know. It's like sighing. I don't mean to do that, Basic, but it's perfume as an industry, I think, is just so different from me. It's hard to make some clear-cut comparisons with other types of media and consumer products with this, because scent is hard to, it's like we said, like down to the bare bones, like scent is hard to patent. Scent is not, our ideas are not all of the discrete components of the fragrance. Our ideas of what are what we do with them. And it's hard to prove that. This is proof that what I did here, nobody else has ever done, and nobody else should ever do it. I think it's very difficult to do something like that with perfume. So enough of this. I think you're going to spend the last half hour here. But first, I'm going to go to those second impressions. But let's just talk about things we've been smelling and wearing lately. The second impressions, though, Grimoire. I have decided that Grimoire, while it is nice, it wouldn't be something that I would pursue a full bottle of, because I think that I definitely, at this time around, do think that my need for this has already been filled through other things, like I said, Declaration, somewhat better actually, Eau de Mez and Diptyque L'Autre. And then Eris Parfums, I love Mabette. I think Mabette is going to end up being a full bottle. I think it will be. I'm really loving it. I love the dry down of it. It's very nice. Nice Civet Accord. And Rose de Jamal. No, I'm good with Nirvana Rose. I think it's very much like Nirvana Rose, honestly. I know somebody is going to, if they know both of them, and they're huge Liz and Demodob fans, they probably would scoff at that, but I think that the winner for tonight is going to be Mabette.
Cool.
Eris Parfums.
Very nice.
All right. So, guys, we'll start off with you, John. What are some things that you have been wearing and smelling and enjoying lately? New discoveries or rediscoveries? What do you have for us?
Well, there's something I've been smelling a lot, and I've been wearing a lot, and I'm writing about as we speak. So that's part of the reason why I'm wearing it a lot. Is hey, oh my gosh, Pep. Hey, Pep. How are you, man?
Hey,
see you, man. And I have no idea what the consensus is out there, but this is the number one Chanel, the L'Eau Rouge.
Ah, wow.
Which is sorry, can't quite get this. This is kind of an interesting concept in a fragrance, which I like. It's really bright. very citrusy, kind of like a cranberry-ish smell on the top.
Mm,
And what I like about it, though, is that it's sort of an attempt at like a mixture of perfume and a skin tonic. So
Yeah.
it's got, kind of good oils for your skin mixed in with a very light fragrance. It's off your skin pretty much within 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinarily light. And it's more part of like a morning routine as opposed to wearing a very heavy fragrance per se. And I like this idea of merging like a skin product into a fragrance as like kind of a new, which is, like I said, I think there's a lot of new ideas in perfume.
Yeah.
And this to me strikes me as like a new idea, which I like as a notion.
Mm.
I also like the idea that I can put this on and then I could put something totally else on in the afternoon, because that's very practical, because I smell a lot of things during the day. So,
Yeah, I like the idea of that. Some people are not so keen on it. They think, like, I'm not wasting my money on something that's only going to stick around for a couple of hours.
right.
But that begs the question, what is the purpose? Like, what are you trying to get out of fragrance? Like, do you expect your meal to be felt and tasted with every burp for, 12 hours? That sometimes experience can't be really measured. The value of experience can't be measured in the time, the length of time that it is that you experience it.
Right.
So it all depends on the type of enthusiast or or lover of fragrance that you are. Like, I have no qualms if something makes a certain impact on me, even if it's 2 hours. I feel like it's worth my money, and it's my business anyway. So, but yeah, I don't think that there's anything wrong with enjoying a fragrance that is a pick me up, that gives you a certain feeling that probably you wouldn't get from something that was longer lasting anyhow. But maybe I should give that a shot. I actually think I have a sample of that sitting somewhere, and I haven't gotten around to it. I'll give it a whirl.
You should.
What else do you have?
What have you got, Adam? You go.
Oh, Adam, you can go. Well, we'll go one at a time. We'll go in circles. So.
Yeah, I'll do like my 3 little one shots, and then I'll save
Okay.
the one that I actually have more to say about for last. So really quick, I have been wearing one that I've been really excited about by a brand that I've been really enjoying discovering called Universal Flowering, and they have one more lascivious or suggestive a title called Daddy, and I'll let your imagination run wild there, but it's delightful. It's great. It's a really great fragrance for woody perfume fans. That's all I'm going to say about it right now. I'll write about it eventually, but Hinoki, earthier tones, some guaiac. It's marvelous. Black pepper. What could go wrong? I wanted to give a quick shout out to the brand Weinerblut. I don't think that they have enough attention given to them. I recently discovered the fragrance Clubwasser.
Oh my God, I want to try that. How did you access a sample of it? What?
I during a meetup, actually. Yeah. John. But it was just sort of thrust upon me, and I ended up just finding myself obsessed with it. So again, the brand is called Weinerblut. It's an Austrian brand, so German pronunciation there. And the last really quick one I wanted to talk about was Search from Amouage. It's one of the new Amouages. I really enjoy it. It combines 2 unexpected extremes of citrus and smokiness and woodiness, and it does it very well. I just thought it was a really interesting creation, not something I was expecting from the brand, but surprised me in an interesting way.
Very cool.
And did I spell that correct? I'm actually checking. Folks are asking about, is it Wienerblut? Wienerblut. Wiener. Weinerblut. So it is Weiner, not Wein. Oh, Wiener would be the other way. I think. Weinerblut. Clubwasser. Yeah, the green bottle. I've been wanting to try that because I love mastic. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't even describe what Club Wasser smells like. I apologize. It's a very green herbal perfume with spicy accents, and the greenness is very sharp at first, and then it just sort of slowly devolves into like a milkier kind of softer, more rounded greenness over the course of its life on skin. And I thought that was really interesting. Has quite an interesting development in that respect. So I really appreciated that about it.
Yeah,
Great.
that sounds very cool.
All right, I have a few goodies here. I'll share a couple. I guess we can do a couple right now.
Yeah.
One is Anatole Le Breton. This is the second one that I picked up from him. I love Bois Lumière, but this is L'Eau de Melzen. And this is a gorgeous green orris. And there's also a very pronounced hawthorn note. I've been fascinated with the idea of hawthorn in fragrance. Now, if you ever see hawthorn as a note in a breakdown, it always seems to be kind of like a supporting note, which kind of makes sense because if you've ever smelled hawthorn blossoms, they bloom in May, and in the distance they smell beautiful, but they're pretty intense. It's kind of like they're highly anisic and pungent, with almost like this cheesy undertone. And I know that sounds kind of gross, but there's something captivating about it. I like smelling the blossoms up close, but some people find them overwhelming. But in the air, it's beautiful. And here, there's a very pronounced hawthorn note. And it's just beautiful. That's one of my newer acquisitions, L'Eau de Melzen, Anatole Le Breton. I also, did a second impression of his Grimoire, which I think is his most popular one, but I like this one a lot. Next, I realized that I neglected vanilla. Neglected, as if I have this obligation as like a perfume, content creator, like I must.
Neglected to focus on vanilla, do you mean?
To focus on vanilla. Because it's just I take it for granted. It's not a note that like excites me as much. Like a vanilla centered fragrance has never been like my go-to. But I figured if I was gonna go for a vanilla fragrance, I was gonna go in and go hard. So I discovered Vanilla de Madagascar from I Perfume de Firenze. And this is a beautiful,
I've actually smelled this one. Yes, it's got it does like a creamy aspect to it too, doesn't it?
My God, it is. It's so gorgeous.
This is a really gorgeous vanilla perfume. I know.
I don't know. Maybe I'll blow myself up here. Not literally like this. Vanilla de Madagascar from I Perfume de Firenze. Yeah. This is my first vanilla solo note. I don't know unless you count La Lique Le Parfum as a vanilla solo note. Yeah, I never treaded this territory of vanilla, but I'm kind of liking it. I think I'm having a newfound appreciation for vanilla fragrances. So this one's great.
That one in particular, because I just smelled a sample I have of that, and I was reminded like that's a really fascinating vanilla fragrance.
Yeah, this is the kind that I can sink my teeth into. So I'll do two for now, but John, let's get back to you. Share some more.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I just grabbed a bunch of things and, very haphazardly thinking, one thing one thing I'm interested in recently, in fact, I may have mentioned this to you, JJ, is this house that some people may know of. It's called Dorin, and it's a very old fragrance house. They have these bottles, which they had show sort of like little abstractions of the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
And this is a bottle I think that they actually copyrighted. Did they have copyright back then? Anyway, this is like late 19th century was the original bottle that they created. And the house was sort of revitalized in I can't recall now. I want to say it was in the 1980s, essentially. And they're hard to get here in the States. I've only found one store in Seattle that sells their work, but you can talk to the people there at the house in France and say, I'm going to go somewhere in Europe. Can you ship them there? And they'll be like, oh yeah, cool. Or, they're very easy to work with there. But they make these like frighteningly good fragrances, and they tend to be a little bit on the fussy side and very kind of old world, but damn, they're good. And they decided to make a kind of somewhat Middle Eastern or Near Eastern line of work. And this is the Année d'Arabie, which is a kind of oud and rose type fragrance, which I know we have loads and loads of rose and oud type fragrances, but
yes, tell us what makes this one different.
I think what makes it so different is that this is actually, if I'm not mistaken, is actually composed by an Arabian perfumer, and she there's a sensitivity to it that's really different and has a kind of a softer hand to it. And when I smell this, it's as though someone said, I want to make a nude fragrance that really would please an oud enthusiast, but would also please someone who just wants to wear a really damn good perfume. And those are two things that don't always necessarily meet, right? And I'm kind of astounded by the quality level of some of the work that John makes. And this one in particular, Année d'Arabie is God, it's really stunning. Really, really good work. I mean, there's like little hints of saffron in there, and a really wet, juicy kind of a rose. Like if you just pulled a petal apart and you actually, there's like little bits of moisture right there. That kind of a rose.
Yeah.
Beautifully done. Really beautiful.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying that a lot, actually.
So just a quick PSA, public service announcement. So folks, if you wouldn't mind considering buying me a coffee, or one, two, three, four, five, however generous you are. In fact, if you are feeling quite generous, if you were to buy 10, sorry. Changed my mind. No, it was actually 10. If you buy 100 coffees, then I can buy a new laptop. Thanks. If you buy 10 coffees, I did this before. For the first person who buys 10 coffees, that would be a $50 value. I will send 4 doubles of full bottles in my collection, because I like my fragrances, but I don't need all these doubles. But you can get them for $50. Plus, I will also send a little care package of goodies and samples and things along with it. So that would be 10 coffees at Buy Me a Coffee, and the website is right there. Or if you don't have that much right now, that's fine. You can just send me 1 coffee, 2 or 3, but 10 will get you 4 full bottles of doubles that I have in my collection. So that is the offer for this evening. We do have a quick question before we continue sharing our current sniffs here. Panel, what is your least favorite floral?
Wow. Least favorite floral? That's a great question.
Yeah, that's
I have
a tough
pretty
one.
simple answer for that myself. Of course, nothing is a simple answer, but I guess I think it has to be tuberose, and I say that not because I have like an outright hatred towards it, but because I want to like it more than I end up liking it. I think it's a really fascinatingly complex flower and accord in perfumery. It can be shifted in so many different directions, and I find that utterly fascinating. Unfortunately, I've yet to find a direction that I really want to wear much of. I also just haven't explored it as much as I have other florals, so that might be part of the problem. But I have to say tuberose because I just haven't found the right one for me yet.
Fair.
That's fair. Yeah.
I know a lot of people struggle with it. I love its minty facets, like all the things that people typically don't like about it, earthiness, mintiness. I love those aspects of it. Yeah. It just has this overwhelming quality that is typically rendered in perfume that I don't vibe with.
Let's talk later. I'll recommend a few where there's the tuberose is there, but it isn't It isn't muscling its way through. I would imagine fracas would be very difficult for you because that's even as somebody who can appreciate tuberose, that's a little much for me. John, do you have one? A least favorite floral?
Yeah, I think I know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not going to like this answer.
I'm probably going to be.
Yeah,
I know which one it is. No, it's because it's one of my favorites. I know it. Say it. Just say it and get it over with.
it's mimosa. It's mimosa.
No.
Yeah, it's mimosa, and I think it's because it's you know, and I'll explain why. It's because it always feels like it's kind of, you know, it's you know, I always feel like smelling mimosa is like drinking non-alcoholic beer. You know, it's like it's kind of like
so it's the odules of fragrance,
yeah, exactly.
of flowers.
It doesn't have
The O'Douls.
balls, you know. I mean, if I may be so frank, but like it just
Yeah.
doesn't. It feels like a watercolor version of a flower. Like if it's so thin and gauzy that it's kind of you know, how can you hate mimosa? Sorry,
You are pissing some people off here, not just me.
I'm sorry, Margie.
But in Farnesiana, I feel like it's pretty ballsy, and also like on Fleur de Cassis. But maybe Cassis is it more so mimosa than Cassis? I mean, they're both in the same family. But
Sure. And believe me, there's a couple of perfumes I've smelled, and I thought, oh wow, you know, you can get that sort of mimosa accord. I also really should stress too that I haven't grown up with it. Like it doesn't grow. It was never part of like a common smell that I grew up with. So yeah, it's a tough note for me. Not my favorite. Yeah. What about you?
Oh God, this is a tough one because I love so many. I'll have to just think about all the things I love and then see which one I love the least. Because I love violet, I love mimosa, I have to have a word with you because that's one of my favorites. Carnation. Don't even get me started. I'm just kidding. Love carnation. Jasmine. Yeah. Oh my God, this is awful. Rose. Narcissus. Oh yeah. I'm trying to think of like freesia. There you go. Freesia. I don't mind freesia. Freesia can be kind of cool, but it's not like oh my God, I just have to have a fragrance with freesia in it. So there, that's it. I love fresh freesias though, like the real flowers, but I haven't really found like a really good freesia scent. I mean, is a fresa diptyque? I haven't. That's one I haven't smelled from diptyque. That's supposed to be like a freesia scent. But,
I have not smelled it either, so that's a good question.
Maybe another one would be. I love the way that magnolia smells in real life, like the scented magnolias. But magnolia to me is kind of elusive in fragrance. Like it's supposed to be magnolia, but I'm not getting a magnolia vibe. So maybe those two.
Scent.
Yeah, because it's like it's vaguely citrusy, vaguely floral, vaguely watery. It's very watery, aqueous, like just like the flowers themselves. But I think it's hard to capture that sensation from smelling magnolias in a perfume. So yeah, okay, freesia and magnolia and everything else I love to death. So yeah,
something just quickly to throw out there, which is interesting, is magnolia is the plant and the tree and all that is one of the few truly like almost dinosaur age kind of like such an ancient plant. And when you really look at the damn blossoms and the way they open and stuff, they are scary looking things.
They are.
Yeah, I feel like we're smelling something of like a really deep past age.
And they're pollinated by like beetles.
Right. Yes.
Like bees don't even know what to do with them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Which is completely fascinating to me.
Yeah. Dan says that jasmine is my favorite floral. Love it. I love what jasmine does in fragrances. I love jasmine when it interacts with citrus. Love that. Mimosa is a floral I'm still getting used to. It doesn't smell feminine, but to my mind leans older person. And not good at lilac. Love lilac, but lilac, it's tough to find a lilac fragrance that speaks to me. Carnation doesn't play like a floral, though, more like a spice. I could see that. It's a spicy floral, but it's but it is floral, but it has a floral element because you have to have floral elements to kind of going back to earlier in the discussion, to build the accord. But it is a lot spicier because of that eugenol content in it. That's why it's often called clovey. All right. Well, back to, I think juniper is my favorite floral. So I don't think juniper, I'm not to be, smarty pants. Unless this is intentional, you're just being a bozo. But juniper is those are the berries. The berries, those are the cones. Actually, they're actually cones technically. One, I think it's I think it's the male cone of the tree. They taste good too. All right, back to business. John, was it your turn? Were you going to share something next, or whose turn was it?
I got a couple more I could just toss out here. And quickly, but something I just sort of discovered again, which there are a couple things I come back to. And I'm like, oh yeah, that really was a damn good perfume, right? And one of those I just had the other day, which is it's Creed. I don't have a lot of Creeds I go crazy for, and we talked a lot, but Creed's Royal Mayfair. This, I don't know how many people. I'm a big fan, and
I love it. It's the only full bottle Creed that I have in my possession now. I used to have many more. They're gone now.
This stuff is insanely good. And I know some people really don't like it because of that sort of eucalyptus smell to it.
That's what I love about it.
Yeah, it's so damn good. And I wore it again, and I think what I recently and what I love so much about it is just the it's one of these sort of perfectly mixed and proportioned fragrances. Like it just hits all those great. Like it's slightly creamy, it's slightly medicinal, it's slightly bracing, it's slightly sandalwoody. And this is an example. Like no one's really copying Royal Mayfair. I mean, okay, yeah, there's probably somebody who's making copies of Royal Mayfair, but basically it's a brilliant composition. It's a little weird, just weird enough that I love it. And so this feels like a new perfume. Every time I wear it, I'm like, why don't I wear this more often? Right? It's damn good stuff. It really is. Yeah, like right now, damn, it smells really good.
Yeah, and there's even something in it that kind of I mean, I don't know if it's in the notes breakdown, but something in it that does kind of remind me a little bit of tuberose. A little bit. A little bit. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just my nose, the way I interpret it. Adam, that might be your, the unlikely choice for your tuberose is one that doesn't really have, tuberose in the nose.
I do like that one a lot.
Yeah.
It's just a little, maybe it's the eucalyptus with something else in it that kind of gives me that feeling. Yeah. But I love it.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Yeah. And just one quick last one. One that I've also been wearing. This is a new thing that I've been wearing kind of a lot. I actually really like this house. I don't know how many people have smelled Maison Rebacci. They've got these pretty funky bottles.
I'll have zoom in and have you show.
My light's a bit bright here, but there we go. Nice little house from France. This one is Bois d'Enfant, which it's interesting because I noticed, JJ, that you had recently, a couple of times, I think you mentioned La Liturgie des Heures by Javoy.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to say this is almost like the kids' version of that.
Oh, interesting. Is it just like a more lighthearted, playful?
Yeah, if you can imagine, kind of like a if Junior was going to wear this and it's not quite as serious and heavy. Bois d'Enfant is like that. So it's a very sweet balsamic pine.
Nice.
And what I like is it's very joyful, and there's not a lot of piney fir resinous balsamic type fragrances like that's actually very happy and joyful the way that this one is.
Yeah.
It's very bright and smiley and pleasant, like really pleasant. It almost feels a little bit like, I don't know, like there's almost like strawberry jam in here type of feeling.
I kind of get that a little bit from like like balsam fir, a little bit of strawberry jam, and then
right. Yeah, it's really beautiful, and I've been enjoying this one a lot.
Catch my whiff earlier. What John had was Royal Mayfair.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, your turn.
Yeah, this is the other one I wanted to mention in a little bit more detail than the others. This is Winter of '99 from the House of Kerosene. So it is technically kind of a gourmand leaning fragrance, although like pretty much any other gourmand I've ever liked, it's a little less so a gourmand. It's sort of like a gourmand with a twist and a gourmand that makes it less sweet. Those are the gourmands that I enjoy. It's like the ones that really have something else that's decidedly not as sweet or edible that are kind of interjected into the rest of the theme. And this certainly accomplishes that. And I think that Kerosene is actually kind of a cool house in that regard. Like Kerosene makes gourmands cool to me. Like Kerosene makes gourmands really like craveable, but like not excessive, right? And
Right.
they all have an edge to them. And in this case, the edge is like this really deep, woody tone of molasses. It's also the first time I've really smelled molasses successfully conveyed in perfume. I love the smell of
that's
molasses. I
right.
can sit over a jar of that stuff all day. I really could. And I love the
So
taste
good
of
on
it too.
toast.
It's amazing stuff, and it's successfully conveyed here. It's molasses. It's on like a base of vanilla, and I don't typically like, vanilla heavy bases in perfume, but for whatever reason, this is deep, dark, and woody enough to work. And then, just in case all of that wasn't tempting enough, he adds nutmeg. So you have molasses, nutmeg, woody notes, and vanilla, and that's all there really is in this composition. But it is just like riddled with little dots of nuance, and you could smell it at different points of the day, and it smells a little bit different than it did an hour or two previous. And I love that this perfumer just made these 4 relatively straightforward notes, except for the molasses. That's kind of an interesting accord, like into something that's like harmonious and very, very complex. And I really enjoy that about it. It's just a great gourmand. It's probably one of the best. It's dotted with nuance. It's craveable, but not too much. And it does everything it needs to do. So I would really recommend Winter of '99 from Kerosene.
Do you have the bottle there with you? Do you have...
I don't, not here, but not on me, unfortunately.
No. It's okay. It's okay.
I can hold up a kerosene bottle. Like
it looks like this.
So it would look like this, but have a different name on it. There you go. All right, great. All right, and I'll round things off with 3. I have 3 here. I won't regale too long on each of them. One vintage or semi-vintage that has been something I've been enjoying a lot. This is Norel from the 60s, 1968, 1969. Josephine Catapano, she also composed Fiji. And this is a great green Chypre, galbanum, hyacinth, but with an animalic base, more so than your average green Chypre from the late 60s. And it dries down. The dry down is impressive. And it has like a lot of like costus in it. So it's like, it gives you that kind of like sebaceous skin kind of smell with all these other elements. It's really beautiful. And this is a prestige fragrances version. So I guess according to those who are in the know, you want to get either those that were produced by Norel itself or by prestige fragrances. And you, unfortunately, these are the bottles that are most common, go figure. You want to avoid the 5-star fragrances version. I guess 5-star isn't really that great at keeping the compositions intact, but that's one that I've been really enjoying. Norel. This is like a little 18 milliliter bottle. It's nice. Next, I picked up this. This is, let's see who. Well, it has the name. I was hoping to just rely on the logo, but the name is right on it. See who it is. Lanvin. This is Lanvin Mycen. Mycen Eau de Lanvin. So this is the Eau de Toilette version of Mycen. Right. And this is another gorgeous mid-century style sort of floral aldehydic Chypre great stuff. This is the one that I scored for a pretty good deal. This beautiful bottle. I don't know how old it is. Probably late 70s, early 80s. I don't know. It's not like an aerosol, so it could be the 80s. And it smells brilliant. I picked it up for $45, which is kind of a steal for my sin. So that's another one. And then the third one, also a vintage. Now check out this bottle. This is Grain de Sable. Grain de Sable from Nick. I have to read the name to remember how to pronounce it. Nikki Verfaillie. And this takes some of the ideas from Edmund Rudnitska and Diarella and really expands upon them. There is this overripe melon, but also like papaya and these like overripened tropical fruits. It is wild. This came out like in the early 80s, and this could smell like some sort of like experimental kind of like niche fragrance today. I think it's really cool. It's like one of the best like tropical fruit fragrances I've ever smelled. And I guess if this means anything to anybody out there, this was lauded by Luca Turin in one of his books, and it's Grain de Sable. The bottle's really cool. It doesn't stand upright. It sits like that, like a pebble. It's kind of cool.
That's very cool, actually.
Yeah. Great stuff. Grain de Sable. So, yeah, I've been enjoying that lately too. I found that for pretty cheap, for $20. I don't know if that's the usual price, but yeah, those are my goodies. Sure. Any more goodies from you guys?
Yeah,
you have a couple more. Share a couple more.
Of course.
Do it.
I always do. I mean, there's the usual suspects, right? Like I'm starting to do some of the. I mean, one of the. I mean, people know you, JJ, are a big fan of Serge Lutens. I am as well. So one I've really enjoyed a lot lately is Indémodable, which is a huge fan of this. It's a very like there's some cumin and there's some fruit. I mean, it's like it could go straight out of the playbook, right? It's oh man, it's heavy. It's syrup. It's like his basic. It's one of his syrupy, heavy kind of really woody. It's sort of like a I would almost call it like a distant dark cousin of Araby.
Interesting.
Yeah, with maybe possibly some Immortelle or something like of that ilk in there.
So is this one of the Glaciels that was it was new? It was not actually like a fragrance that got migrated over to a Graziel. Is that correct?
Yeah. This was originally released as a Graziel, right?
Yeah.
And what I did like about some of the newer version of his older style is that a lot of people said about like Participe Passé and Le Nommable is that there was sort of like this interesting return to what he did best, but with this almost like more brooding intensity. Like I'm going to make them even darker and weirder and more like fruitcake and that sort of like candied cherries and citrus peels and that sort of which I really appreciate that he decided to go even more weird and with the compositions. Yeah,
I think that's a reason why I love what he does so much as far as that like fruitcake kind of stuff, because I was one of those kids who ate the fruitcake. All the other kids didn't want to touch it, but I'm like, give it to me. I'll eat every little piece, even little citron pieces that were dyed green.
Well, it has that very specific. I mean, there is something I do find interesting in perfume with that smell of things that are like, and you joked about like dill and pickles, but I like things that are like preserved. Like I love the smell of like a Chinese apothecary or Chinese candy store that has like, preserved plums and that kind of smell, or like lots of stuff like covered in licorice powder and stuff like that. God, I love that kind of smell. And I find that a lot in Serge's fragrances. I do. Yeah.
Yes, I have other fans. Yes, love it around the holidays. Right. Yeah, love it. Sorry. And I love Christopher Sheldrake's work, and that's one that I haven't smelled yet. And
it's up your street, definitely. It's something you.
yes, I'm making a little note to myself here.
Yeah, it's definitely a something that's you would like. And also, well, you know, and while we're at it, something that I wrote about over the summer and I really enjoyed, and I've been giving a pretty good wear to as well, is from our friend Eugene.
Oh, sorry.
Les Abstraits.
Yeah.
La Douleur Exquise. I really, really, really like this a lot. I thought it was a great release from last year. His, you know, very, very kind of like smooth, sophisticated rose iris. A lot happening in here. Yeah, I think this is a beautiful fragrance. I really have enjoyed this one a lot.
All three of them are spectacular. Yeah. I just recently got a hold of Descendles, which was just released. Yeah, very impressive lineup, and a great perfumer behind them with Antoine Lee. Yeah,
definitely. And I wore quite a bit of it during late summer, early autumn, and I've just sort of picked it up again, and I've started wearing this one again. But yeah, it's all very good work. But I particularly like this one quite a bit.
Very nice. Nice choices, everyone. Oh, great. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take this backstage? We'll have a little bit more discussion over there for a little bit. And we do have a question here from Jean-Qui
this one is L'Innommable. L'Innommable.
Here, I'm going to type that in there for the folks.
And he characteristically leaves it very difficult to actually read, which I also find very cool.
Oh yeah, and those are not really easily photographable bottles at all. Nothing you can do to make it work. Right. It's challenging, but great fragrances in them. So we're gonna go backstage, everyone. I'm trying to get used to doing like a proper like wrap up. Oh, you know what I need to do? I need to do some outro music. That's what I need to do. So I'll start the outro music. I'm supposed to do this without anybody noticing, but
it's just the band Kiss playing for no reason.
Sorry, I turned that down just a little bit. I'm just getting used to this. That's our outro music. It's a theme music for Effluvium. So next week we are going to have Mark Sage of Clandestine Laboratories, and the week after that will be Dana Sandhu of A Nose, and she'll be joining us then. And until next time, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. John, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. And Adam, as always, always love to have you here. Hopefully we can see you more often in the future. Absolutely. Join us for further Tuesdays. And everybody take care, depending upon where you are. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And that's it. Yeah. We'll just let the music. I think I was supposed to let the music play out, so now I'm going to make it very awkward. See, I don't have the timing on this. It's supposed to I'm supposed to time it so that okay. No?
You have a way to go. You're going to become an NPR host. I'll say
still more music. This is supposed to be like an NPR vibe too.
I'll help you at NPR to tell you
Yeah. So this is fun.
Indeed.
Do you like this music? It's very nice. It's actually, I was mentioning earlier, it's from a KPM album. You know those KPM sound library albums?
Oh,
so right. It's like for sound libraries for playing over, radio, TV, music, TV or film and what have you. So there's some great soundtracks. So I thought it would be good to have as a theme song. So, very cool. And this is a very long one. I think I have to get used. I hope I don't have it looped. No, it's not looped. Okay. I got 27 people who are still tuned in, just sitting here waiting for us to have the music be over with. Everybody's like, have a good one. See you later. Take care. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Signing off. And signing